The autumn light of the Scottish Highlands drifted through the high windows of Caerwyn Hall, tracing pale gold upon the stone floors and stirring motes of dust that hung in the still air. Beyond the mullioned glass, the moors stretched vast and silent, cloaked in a faint mist that softened every outline. Within that hush stood Lady Amelia Caerwyn, Duchess of Arbor and mistress of this great house, her hands folded upon the railing of the grand staircase as though the carved banister might steady her against the weight of another lonely day. It had been 7 years since her marriage to Adrian Caerwyn, Duke of Arbor, the man whose title had restored her family's fading honour and whose absence had defined nearly every season that followed. He had gone to London on matters of parliament, of commerce, of anything that might keep him far from the echoing corridors of their estate. Letters arrived rarely, written in a hand too formal to betray affection, and when he returned as he was expected to this evening, his presence filled the hall with a different kind of emptiness, colder and more deliberate. Servants moved quietly around her, preparing rooms, airing draperies, setting logs upon the hearth in anticipation of his arrival. No one spoke his name aloud, yet all knew that the Duke's homecomings carried the weight of storm clouds. Amelia's companion, Lady Margaret Whitmore, approached from the east wing, her expression kind but searching. She had known Amelia since girlhood, had witnessed her gentle spirit harden into composure. "He will be here before dusk," Margaret said softly. "Perhaps this visit will be different." Amelia offered a faint smile. "Perhaps the weather will change, though I have ceased to expect it. Still, a wife must keep hope." "Hope," Amelia murmured, "is an art I practice in silence." The two women descended to the drawing-room, where a fire already glowed. The room bore the elegance of restraint books neatly arranged, portraits of ancestors regarding them with painted indifference. Amelia paused before one canvas, depicting the first Duke of Arbor astride a dark horse, his gaze stern and remote. "The men of this house," she said, "seem carved from the same stone as these walls." Margaret poured tea and watched her. "He is not without heart, Amelia. It is only buried beneath too much pride." "Then perhaps pride is the only mistress he ever loved." A distant rumble of wheels upon gravel ended their conversation. The sound grew until the echo of hooves filled the courtyard. Amelia straightened, every movement graceful, measured, learned through years of discipline. When the doors opened and Adrian Caerwyn entered, the chill of the evening seemed to follow him inside. Tall, broad-shouldered, with hair touched faintly by silver and eyes the colour of a winter sea, he carried himself as though the world itself bowed to his will. His gaze swept the hall and rested briefly on Amelia. "My lady," he said, inclining his head. "Your Grace," she replied with perfect composure. "You are well, I trust." "As well as one may be in your absence." Quote. He removed his gloves, handed them to the waiting servant, and without another word crossed toward his study. The echo of his boots lingered long after he vanished from sight. Margaret, standing near the door, exhaled quietly. "You did not expect warmth, and yet you look wounded." "One cannot be wounded by what no longer lives," Amelia answered, though her voice trembled slightly. When darkness settled, she dined alone in the smaller parlour. Rain began against the windows, soft at first, then steady, a rhythm she had come to know as the song of her solitude. Above, in the Duke's study, light glowed through the draped windows. She imagined him bent over letters, speaking to no one. It had become a ritual, his silence, her endurance. Later, as she stood before the dying fire, she thought of the life that might have been hers had affection accompanied duty. Yet even in her sorrow there was a dignity that refused despair. She believed that every heart, even one long denied, held the capacity to awaken when touched by truth. What she did not yet know was that truth would soon enter her world with the quiet force of a turning tide. For now she turned to the shadows of the hall and whispered, half to herself and half to those unseen souls who might still listen, "If you too have known the chill of waiting, the long silence between what was promised and what remains, then perhaps this story is for you. Walk beside me through Caerwyn Hall, and before the tale is done, may you find a spark of hope in its embers. Subscribe, leave your thoughts, and let your voice join mine, for from the smallest echoes begin the greatest awakenings." The morning that followed the Duke's return arrived pale and windless, the sky the colour of pewter above the moors. Within Caerwyn Hall, a hush still reigned, broken only by the soft tread of servants and the faint crackle of the fire in the breakfast-room. Amelia had risen early, as was her habit, though sleep had visited her only briefly. She sat at the long table near the window, her hands resting upon a cup grown cold, her thoughts wandering like the mist outside. When Adrian entered, the air in the room seemed to change. He wore the expression of a man too accustomed to command to imagine warmth could ever be required of him. His greeting was polite, almost perfunctory, yet something in the quiet between them carried more weight than any quarrel might have done. "I trust the night offered you rest," he said. "It was a night like any other," Amelia replied. "And you, your grace, have you found the peace you sought in London?" "There is little peace to be found anywhere these days," he answered, taking his seat at the far end of the table. For a time neither spoke. The sound of the clock upon the mantel measured the silence in patient strokes. At last he glanced up, his eyes thoughtful. "I am told there is to be a dinner at Halston Manor next week," he said. "Lady Halston appears determined to parade every notable soul within 50 miles beneath her chandeliers. Have you received her invitation?" "I have," Amelia replied, lowering her gaze to the delicate china before her. "I had not intended to attend." "Why not?" "I have learned that pity, though sweetly disguised, leaves a bitter aftertaste. I see enough of it here without seeking more." A faint crease appeared between his brows, as though her words troubled him more than he expected. "You care too much for what society whispers," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. "Society's whispers are often the only music heard in these halls," she returned. He looked as though he might answer, then thought better of it, and turned his attention to the papers beside his plate. The conversation, such as it was, ended there. After he left for the stables, Amelia walked through the gardens, the damp earth carrying the scent of rain. The roses had long since lost their bloom, their stems bare save for a few stubborn petals that clung to life in defiance of the coming frost. She admired their courage, envied it perhaps, for she too endured in silence, though her heart had grown weary of patience. By afternoon, Lady Margaret arrived, her carriage wheels splashing mud upon the drive. She swept into the drawing-room with a burst of familiar energy, her shawl damp from the mist. "My dear Amelia," she exclaimed, "I have been reading all manner of absurd gossip. They say the Duke plans to attend Lady Halston's dinner. Some even claim he has accepted at your urging. Kai's." "At mine?" Amelia smiled faintly. "You know better than to believe such romantic inventions. He decides his own movements, always." Margaret removed her gloves with a sigh. "Still, if he attends, propriety demands that you accompany him. It might remind the world and him that a duchess yet stands beside the Duke." Amelia turned toward the window where twilight was gathering. "Do you believe such reminders alter the heart, Margaret?" "Perhaps not," her friend admitted, "but they may alter appearances, and appearances are the scaffolding upon which truth is often built." That evening, as dusk folded itself around the manor, Adrian entered Amelia's sitting room unannounced. The sight of him there, framed by lamplight and shadow, startled her more than she cared to show. "I understand Lady Halston expects us both," he said. "Then you intend to go?" "Yes." He hesitated, studying her face. "It would seem discourteous to refuse yet another invitation. London already assumes we avoid society. Do we not? Perhaps it is time to change that." There was no warmth in his tone, yet something else lingered, a sense of weary resignation perhaps, or the faintest spark of reconsideration. Amelia inclined her head. "As you wish, Your Grace. I will make the necessary arrangements." Quote. When he left, the door closed softly behind him, leaving the faint scent of sandalwood and rain. Amelia sat long after, staring into the fire, her thoughts a tangle of questions she dared not ask. What had prompted this sudden decision? Was it pride, duty, or some hidden motive she could not yet name? Outside, the wind had risen, sweeping across the moors and rattling the windows like a warning. The flames flickered low, casting brief shadows that danced across the walls. She watched them until they faded, whispering to herself that perhaps a single evening in company might do little harm. Yet deep within, where reason gave way to intuition, she felt that something was stirring, something that would not be easily contained once set in motion. In her heart, she knew that every silence hides a story waiting to be spoken, and every glance withheld conceals a question longing for answer. That night, as she extinguished the lamp, she wondered if the approaching dinner would mark the beginning of an end, or the end of a beginning. The week that followed unfurled with the slow inevitability of a tide returning to shore. Each dawn brought pale light through the misted glass of Caerwyn Hall, and with it, a quiet sense of expectation that neither Amelia nor the household could quite name. Preparations for the dinner at Halston Manor moved forward with polite urgency. Seamstresses came and went, bearing silks the colour of old champagne, lace as fine as breath, and gloves of ivory satin. Amelia endured the fittings with a patience born not of vanity but of duty. She had not attended a gathering of note for several seasons. Her life had become a procession of quiet mornings and solitary evenings, of unspoken words folded neatly away like unused letters. Yet as she stood before the looking-glass one afternoon, watching Margaret adjust the fall of her gown, she found herself wondering what it would mean to be seen again, not merely as a title or obligation, but as a woman. "You look exquisite," Margaret said, stepping back to admire her work. "He will have no choice but to notice." Amelia smiled faintly at her reflection. Noticing and seeing are seldom the same thing. Margaret's brows drew together. Perhaps this evening he will learn the difference. When the appointed day arrived, the sky cleared as if by design. Carriages lined the gravel approach to Halston Manor, their lamps glowing in the cool air. The manor itself blazed with light, each window a promise of warmth and music. As their carriage approached, Amelia's hands tightened around her fan, though she kept her expression serene. Adrian sat opposite her, immaculately composed, his gaze fixed upon the shifting lanterns outside. "This will be tedious," he murmured. "Then we shall endure it with dignity," she replied. He glanced at her then, as if surprised by her calm. For a brief instant, the faintest trace of something softer crossed his features. Admiration, perhaps, but it vanished as swiftly as it came. The great doors opened upon a blaze of chandeliers. Laughter floated through the air, mingling with the strains of a string quartet. The scent of wax and roses filled the room. Amelia entered upon Adrian's arm, and conversation faltered for a heartbeat as heads turned toward them. It had been years since the Duke and Duchess of Alba had appeared together. Whispers followed like ripples across a still pond. "The Duchess grows lovelier by the year," someone murmured. "And still no heir," came the answering whisper. Amelia held her chin high and smiled as though she heard nothing. Adrian's arm remained rigid beneath her hand. Their hostess, Lady Halston, greeted them with a mixture of pleasure and curiosity. "Your Graces, what an unexpected delight. London will be abuzz with this reunion." "Reunion, my lady?" Adrian's tone was courteous but cool. "I fear we have never truly been apart." The remark, delivered without warmth, drew a knowing smile from their hostess. "How fortunate for us all," she said. As the evening unfolded, the ballroom shimmered with movement. Amelia conversed with the other guests, her voice even, her laughter light, though she felt as though each smile cost her a breath. Across the room she could see Adrian engaged in discussion with a group of gentlemen, his posture formal, his expression impassive. Yet once, when she happened to glance his way, she found his eyes upon her, their chill softened by an unreadable thought. It was in that moment that the murmur around the entrance began. The musicians faltered, the hum of voices thinned, and Amelia turned to see the cause. A woman had arrived, tall, striking, radiant in a gown of pale gold that caught the candlelight like fire. Her hair, fair as wheat at harvest, gleamed beneath the chandeliers. She paused at the threshold, surveying the room with the assurance of one long accustomed to admiration. Lady Ilara Montrose. The name passed through the crowd like the first breath before a storm. Amelia's heart tightened, though she willed herself to stillness. She did not need to be told who the woman was. Instinct whispered it. There was something in the poised turn of her head, in the faint, practiced smile that carried memory even to those who had never known her. Ilara's eyes swept the gathering until they found Adrian. For a moment, time seemed to collapse. Adrian's hand, which had been resting upon his glass, stilled. The faintest pallor touched his face. Ilara inclined her head with the grace of a queen acknowledging a subject, and the world resumed its motion. "Good heavens," Margaret murmured beside Amelia. "I had heard she returned to the continent after her husband's death. What can she mean by appearing here?" "Perhaps she tires of exile," Amelia said quietly. "Or perhaps she intends to remind the world she was never truly gone." When Lady Halston led the golden apparition toward them, the air itself seemed to tighten. "Your Grace," Ilara said, her voice smooth as polished glass. "It has been far too long." "Indeed," Adrian replied, every syllable measured. "I trust the years have treated you kindly." "Kindness," she said with a faint smile, "is a luxury seldom granted to those who follow their hearts." Her gaze shifted then, settling upon Amelia. "And this must be your Duchess. I have heard so much." Amelia curtsied with flawless grace. "Not all, I hope, has been unpleasant." Quote, "On the contrary," Ilara replied, the edge of a challenge glinting beneath her civility. "Your reputation for composure precedes you. I see it is well deserved." Their eyes met two women bound by one man's history, each measuring the other in silence. The music resumed, but its melody seemed distant, drowned beneath the pulse that quickened in Amelia's ears. Adrian bowed slightly. "If you will excuse us, Lady Montrose, the evening grows late." Quoting. "But of course," Ilara said, her smile unbroken, "some reunions must wait for quieter hours." As they turned away, Amelia felt the tremor that passed through her husband's arm. She said nothing, for there was nothing yet to say. The ghosts of the past had walked once more among the living, and she knew that whatever calm she had built would soon be tested by the storm that followed. The carriage wheels turned slowly through the fog as they left Hulston Manor behind. Inside, silence settled like frost upon glass. Adrian sat rigid, his gloved hands resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. Amelia, opposite him, kept her gaze upon the window, though the night beyond offered nothing but her own reflection. Neither spoke for several minutes. At last she broke the stillness. "You knew she would be there." His eyes flicked toward her. "No, I did not. And yet your surprise was curiously quiet." "Go." "I have learned to quiet many things," he said, the words low, almost weary. Amelia's fingers tightened around her fan. "Do you intend to see her again?" He hesitated, and that pause was answer enough. "She is recently widowed," he said at last. "It would be ungracious to refuse a word of condolence." "Courtesy is rarely mistaken for devotion," she replied, her tone even, "though in your case the distinction may blur." He turned toward the window. "Must every kindness be suspect?" "Not every kindness," Amelia said, "only those offered to the ghosts we refuse to bury." The rest of the journey passed in silence. When they reached Caerwyn Hall, he assisted her from the carriage with a formality that felt more like a wall than a gesture. Inside, the great doors closed upon the night, shutting out the echo of the world beyond. Later, in her chamber, Amelia dismissed her maid and sat before the fire. The embers glowed faintly, each spark rising and fading like a thought unspoken. She remembered Ilara's smile, how it had hovered between charm and cruelty, and the way Adrian's composure had faltered, just for an instant. There was something hollow in his eyes, not merely longing but confusion, as though memory itself had betrayed him. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she said. Lady Margaret entered, her shawl drawn close against the chill. "Forgive me for intruding at this hour, but I could not sleep. The night feels uneasy." Amelia gestured toward the chair near the hearth. "Then we are alike. Sit, and tell me what is said already." Margaret sighed. "They speak of nothing else. Lady Montrose's return has set the county alight. Some claim she has come to reclaim what she lost. What she cast away," Amelia corrected gently. "She is dangerous, my dear. Her charm is a weapon honed by regret. You must guard yourself." Quote. "Against what?" Amelia asked. "A woman's vanity or a man's weakness?" Margaret hesitated. "Perhaps both. She has known how to wield them before." The fire snapped softly between them. For a moment, they sat in silence, two women bound by the knowledge that love, in certain circles, was less a gift than a currency. "Do you love him still?" Margaret asked quietly. Amelia looked into the flames. "I do not know if one can love what one has never truly possessed. Yet affection clings like ivy, it grows upon whatever structure will hold it, even stone." When Margaret had gone, Amelia remained by the fire until dawn pressed pale fingers against the window panes. Below, the courtyard stirred. Servants moved through the mist, beginning the day. She rose and crossed to the window. Adrian was there, already mounted, his figure a shadow against the grey. He did not look up toward her window before riding out toward the hills. That evening he did not return for supper, nor the next. By the third night, worry mingled with pride in her breast, and she sought Bennet, the butler who had served the family since her girlhood. "Has the Duke sent word?" she asked. "No, Your Grace," Bennet said, bowing slightly. "Though I believe Mr. Price, his man in town, delivered a letter this morning. His Grace took it and left immediately." "Did he say where he was bound?" "I believe not, Your Grace, but the seal bore the crest of the Montrose family." Amelia dismissed him with quiet thanks and returned to her sitting room. She stood for a long while by the fire, her hands clasped before her. Whatever had drawn Adrian away again, she knew the name that rested at its heart. 3 days passed before he returned. His horse arrived lathered and spent, his coat dusted with travel. When he entered the hall, Amelia was waiting. "You have been to her," she said without preamble. "Yes," he admitted. "She wished to speak." "And you listened?" He met her gaze at last. "Would you have me turn away from every shadow of my past?" I would have you see the present before it vanishes. Something in her voice, quiet, almost pleading, seemed to pierce him. For the first time in years, he looked at her not as a duty, but as a person standing before him, wounded yet unbroken. He drew a slow breath. She wished to explain herself, he said, to speak of what she called misunderstanding. But there was nothing to explain. I saw in her eyes what I refused to see then, ambition where I had imagined affection. I returned because I found myself weary of ghosts. Amelia's heart tightened, uncertain whether to believe or to fear hope. Then let us see if the living may rest at last, she said softly. He bowed his head, an acknowledgement, a promise perhaps. Then he left her once more, retreating toward his study. But when the door closed, she felt the smallest flicker of warmth, as though a draught long sealed had finally found a way through stone. The days that followed passed beneath a sky the colour of faded parchment. The moors stretched wide and bare beyond Carewin Hall, their silence broken only by the distant cry of ravens circling the trees. Within the great house, that same silence lingered, though something indefinable had shifted. Servants moved with quieter caution, as though sensing that an old rhythm had begun to change. Amelia noticed it too, in the way Adrian lingered longer at breakfast, or how his footsteps, once confined to the echo of his study, now wandered the corridors she had thought he would never cross again. He still spoke little, but there was a difference in his silence, less cold, less deliberate, as if he was searching for words he had forgotten how to speak. One afternoon she found him in the library, standing before the tall shelves where dust gathered like memory upon the spines of unread books. The fire burned low, casting a warm glow over his face. "I did not mean to intrude," she said, pausing by the door. "You do not intrude," he replied, turning toward her. "You live here as I do, though I have too often behaved as though that were not the case." The admission, quiet and unexpected, caught her unprepared. "Habit makes strangers of us all," she said, "even those who share a roof." He gestured toward the chair opposite his own. "Will you sit with me?" She hesitated only a moment before crossing the room. The air between them was fragile, like something newly spun that might break if touched too roughly. "I have been reading the accounts of the estate," he said after a time. "Your stewardship in my absence was more than sufficient. It was prudent. I owe you thanks." "La, you owe me nothing," she answered. "I merely preserved what was entrusted to me." "That is more than I did," he said. "I preserved only my pride." The fire shifted, sending a shower of sparks upward. Amelia looked into the flames, unsure how to bridge the distance his words had both opened and closed. "Pride can be mended," she said softly, "though it is seldom the same once stitched." He studied her for a long moment. "You speak as though you have mended many things." Quote, "Perhaps I have," she replied, "though not always well." He smiled faintly, the first true smile she had seen from him in years, and it unsettled her more than anger ever had. Their conversation drifted then to gentler matters, the condition of the tenants, the autumn harvest, the recent storms that had damaged the eastern walls. It was ordinary talk, yet beneath its simplicity ran an undercurrent of something newly alive. When she rose to leave, he stood as well. "Lady Halston has written," he said. "There will be a gathering at Rosemont Hall next month. She insists upon our attendance." "Must we?" "I think we must," he said. "Appearances, if nothing else, require it." "As you wish," she said, though her heart trembled at the thought of another public display. That night, unable to sleep, Amelia walked through the darkened gallery where portraits of the Carewin line watched from their frames. She paused before one depicting a woman of serene beauty, painted 2 centuries before, her eyes distant yet kind. Beneath the portrait, a plaque bore the name Eleanor Carewin, Duchess of Arbor, beloved of her husband, who had died of fever at 35. Amelia traced the gilded letters with her fingertips. "Beloved," she whispered, "a word that outlives truth." Behind her, a voice answered quietly, "Sometimes it outlasts doubt as well." She turned, startled. Adrian stood at the far end of the gallery, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I did not hear you," she said. "I could not sleep," he replied. "The house is too quiet." He approached slowly until he stood beside her. Together they regarded the portrait. "She was the only one of my ancestors who ever defied convention," he said. "They say she married for affection rather than alliance. Scandalous, of course. Yet the stories of their happiness survive longer than their names." Close quote. "Perhaps because happiness leaves gentler ghosts," Amelia said. He looked at her then, and for the briefest instant she saw weariness give way to warmth. "Would that ours might do the same," he murmured. Before she could answer, he bowed slightly and turned away, leaving her alone once more in the echoing hall. But as she watched him go, she felt a faint, unsteady hope stir within her chest. The following morning brought a letter addressed to Adrian in an unfamiliar hand. It was sealed with dark red wax and marked by a crest she did not at first recognize. When Bennett delivered it, Adrian's expression changed, sharpened, shadowed. "From whom?" Amelia asked quietly. He folded the letter before answering. "From a Miss Clara Montrose. She claims to be the sister of Lady Elara's late husband. She requests an audience on a matter of importance." Amelia's pulse quickened. "Will you meet her?" "I must," he said. "Whatever business she brings may concern more than the dead." As he left the room, Amelia stood by the window, watching the wind bend the bare branches outside. She could not say why, but unease crept through her like a chill. The peace they had begun to weave, fragile and new, trembled upon the edge of unraveling. Something unseen had shifted again, and instinct whispered that the quiet days at Caerwyn Hall were numbered. The next afternoon descended beneath a sky of restless clouds, their shadows sweeping over the moors like thoughts that refused to settle. Amelia stood in the long gallery, tracing the cold stone of the window frame while awaiting word of her husband's return. Adrian had gone early to meet the young woman whose letter had arrived that morning, a Miss Clara Montrose, newly come from the south, and sister to the late Lord Montrose, whose widow, Elara, had recently stepped once more into their world. Hours passed with the measured slowness of unease. When at last she heard the sound of hooves in the courtyard, Amelia descended to the entrance hall. Adrian entered, his coat darkened by rain, his expression drawn but intent. He paused upon seeing her, as though uncertain whether to speak. "You have met her," Amelia said quietly. "I have," he answered, "and I fear her visit brings more shadows than light." She gestured toward the small parlor nearby. "Come, tell me what she said." He followed her inside, and when the door closed behind them, the air seemed to thicken, heavy with what remained unspoken. Adrian stood by the hearth, his hands clasped behind his back. "She came bearing her brother's journals," he began. "She believes his death was not as natural as the world has been led to think." Amelia felt her breath still. "You mean, she suspects Lady Elara had a hand in it?" The words fell like a blade into the quiet. Adrian continued, his voice low but steady. "Clara claims that in her brother's final months, he wrote of an illness that baffled his physicians, symptoms that worsened only after taking the drafts his wife prepared. There were letters, as well letters sent in secrecy, pleading for help should he die." Amelia sank into the nearest chair, the weight of the revelation pressing upon her chest. "Did she bring proof?" "Only his words," Adrian said, "but they are damning enough. He wrote of a chemist in Italy, one known for his discretion in matters best left unspoken. Clara followed the trail, found the man's records, and discovered that Elara purchased certain powdered substances fatal in small doses." Quote, "For a moment neither spoke. The rain tapped steadily against the windows, soft and relentless. Amelia looked up at her husband. "And what do you believe?" He met her gaze. "For years I sought explanations that would absolve her, believing that betrayal must have some noble reason. Now I find the truth far uglier than I imagined." "She murdered her husband," Amelia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "So it seems," Adrian replied. "And now she returns to England with charm and fortune intact, her widowhood secured by the very crime that freed her." Amelia shuddered. "Why bring this to you? Why not to the magistrates?" "Because there is no evidence that would satisfy them," he said. "The journals are suspicion, not proof, and perhaps she feared the scandal would destroy her family name. She came to warn me instead." "Warn you?" Adrian turned from the fire, his expression grave. "Clara believes Elara's return is not chance. She thinks the woman means to entangle me once more, to secure her position by whatever means she deems necessary. If she could poison one husband, she might be tempted to rid herself of another obstacle." The words sent a chill through Amelia's blood. She rose, crossing to the window. The moors lay under a veil of mist, the horizon blurred and uncertain. "Then we are not safe," she said. He stepped nearer. "No, but we can be cautious. We will act as though nothing has changed, attend the gatherings as planned, and let her believe she holds the advantage. In the meantime, I will have Price investigate further." She turned toward him, her composure wavering. "You intend to face her again?" "I must," he said. "If we retreat, she wins." Amelia studied his face, seeing for the first time not the distance that had long defined him, but a weary determination. "And what part would you have me play in this masquerade?" He hesitated. "You have already played it with more grace than I deserve, but if we are to disarm her, She must see a marriage united, not divided. Appearances will be our shield. She drew a slow breath. Then we shall give her a performance to remember. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, the gulf between them narrowed. He inclined his head, almost a bow. You have courage, Amelia. Necessity makes us brave, she answered. That night, long after he had withdrawn to his study, Amelia sat alone in her chamber. The wind rose, sweeping against the windows with a sound like distant whispers. She thought of Ilara's face, the cold gleam in her eyes, the way she had spoken of following her heart. How easily the world mistook charm for innocence. At her dressing table lay a single candle burning low. Its light trembled across the mirror, casting her reflection in wavering gold. She studied the woman who looked back no longer the quiet wife content with silence, but someone tempered by long endurance, ready at last to act. Below, a door closed softly. She heard Adrian's step in the corridor, steady and measured. For the first time in years, she did not feel merely the ache of his absence, but the echo of his presence. The danger that loomed beyond their walls had drawn them, however reluctantly, toward the same cause. Before extinguishing the light, she whispered to the quiet room, "Let her come then. Whatever poison she brings, we will not drink it unaware." The candle flickered once more, and died, leaving only the faint scent of wax and the certainty that the past had returned, not as memory, but as threat. Morning broke with a sullen sky, its pale light bleeding slowly across the fields beyond Caerwyn Hall. The storm of the previous night had left the earth drenched and gleaming, the scent of wet heather drifting through the open windows. Amelia stood in the breakfast room, a letter unopened beside her cup, her thoughts circling the revelations that had unsettled their lives. Adrian entered quietly, his coat unbuttoned, his hair still damp from the mist outside. There was a new alertness in him now, a tension that made even his silence feel deliberate. When she looked up, he met her gaze without the usual reserve. "Price will begin his inquiries today," he said. "I have given him what little Clara provided: the journals, the letters, the names. If there is truth to her suspicions, he will find it." "And Lady Ilara?" Amelia asked. "She remains in London, though not quietly. Her name is once more upon every tongue. Invitations flow to her as freely as gossip. She has taken a house in Grosvenor Square." "So near," Amelia murmured. "So visible," Adrian replied. "But visibility is not always safety. It may yet betray her." They took breakfast together, a novelty so rare that the servants exchanged brief, curious glances. Adrian poured her tea without speaking, and when she thanked him, his mouth curved faintly in a smile that seemed to startle even him. Afterward, he lingered by the window. "I have been thinking," he said, "if Ilara believes our marriage remains separate, she may see opportunity. That must change. We shall attend the next gathering as husband and wife in truth, or at least in appearance." Amelia set down her cup. "Appearances again." He turned to her. "It is the only weapon she respects. If she cannot find weakness, she will withdraw." "And you believe she will accept defeat so easily?" "I believe she will adapt, as all serpents do. But we must strike first with subtlety." Amelia rose, smoothing the folds of her gown. "Then teach me the art of subtle war, your grace. I have lived too long in peace that was merely surrender." He watched her for a moment, his expression unreadable, then inclined his head. "We begin this evening. Lady Somerset hosts a musical salon. Half of London will attend. You and I will be among them." That afternoon the household moved with restrained urgency. Amelia's maid laid out her gown, a deep shade of garnet that caught the lamplight like wine. She wore no jewels, save for a single string of pearls and a slender bracelet of gold, a gift from her father long ago. When she descended to meet Adrian, he was waiting in the hall, his dark attire impeccably tailored, his gaze momentarily unguarded as it swept over her. "You look—" He paused as if the word itself eluded him. "Distinguished," he finished, though his voice had softened. "And you, your grace, look precisely as society expects a man of reason to appear. Co." He offered his arm, and when she placed her hand upon it, she felt the faintest tremor beneath the fabric of his sleeve. The carriage ride to Lady Somerset's townhouse was filled with the quiet rhythm of hooves upon cobblestones and the distant hum of London beyond the glass. They spoke little, yet the silence between them no longer felt hollow. It was a space in which thought gathered, heavy with all that had been left unsaid. At the entrance, the brilliance of the chandeliers spilled upon them like liquid fire. Musicians tuned their instruments. Laughter mingled with the scent of roses and candle wax. When they entered together, conversation rippled through the crowd. The Duke and Duchess of Arbor, seldom seen side by side, now appeared inseparable. Lady Somerset hurried forward, all gracious delight. "Your Graces, what a joy! You bring distinction to my modest gathering," quoting, "and your gatherings are never modest," Adrian replied, his manner smooth, his hand still resting lightly at Amelia's back. Amelia moved among the guests with measured grace, exchanging greetings, accepting compliments, offering none that were untrue. She could feel Adrian's presence near her always, steady and protective without confinement. When the time came for the performances to begin, Lady Somerset approached with expectant eyes. "Your Grace," she said to Amelia, "surely you will favour us with a piece. I am told your skill upon the pianoforte is exquisite." Amelia hesitated, glancing at Adrian. He nodded once. "You should." And so she sat at the instrument, her fingers finding the keys as if guided by something older than memory. The first notes rose, soft and clear, filling the salon with a melody that spoke of longing restrained and sorrow unspoken. The room fell silent, save for the sound of her playing. When the final chord faded, applause broke like sudden rain. She looked up and found Adrian watching her with a gaze that held neither distance nor duty, but wonder. He stepped forward, took her hand and bowed over it. The gesture, simple as it was, sent a ripple through the crowd. "That," he said quietly, "was beautiful." "Music," she replied, "is the only language I have ever mastered." "Then let it speak for us both," he murmured. Throughout the evening they remained together, conversing, laughing softly at times, their ease so natural that those who observed them began to doubt every rumour ever whispered. Yet across the room, unseen by most, a single pair of eyes watched them with quiet fury. Lady Alara Montrose had arrived late. Dressed in pale blue that gleamed like frost, she stood half-hidden near the door, her smile brittle, her gaze sharp. Amelia felt it before she saw it, the weight of that stare, cold and deliberate. When at last their eyes met, Ilara inclined her head in a gesture that was both greeting and challenge. Adrian, sensing the shift in her stillness, followed her gaze. His expression hardened, though his hand upon Amelia's arm did not waver. "She is here," Amelia whispered. "I see her," he replied. "Let her watch. For once, she will find nothing to feed upon." Quote. They turned together toward the crowd once more, their composure unbroken, though both knew that this poised harmony could not hold forever. Behind Ilara's practiced smile lay a hunger that had already destroyed one life and now sought another. When dawn touched the rooftops of London, its light dimmed by a veil of smoke, Amelia awoke to a sense of stillness so fragile that she scarcely dared to move. The night at Lady Somerset's salon had left behind an aftertaste of both triumph and foreboding. Society, ever hungry for novelty, had feasted upon the sight of the Duke and Duchess of Arbor, newly reconciled, while beneath the polite chatter ran the electric current of speculation. Yet beneath that same glittering surface, something darker stirred. Adrian had spoken little after they returned to Caerwyn Hall. His silence carried thought, not avoidance. Amelia had learned to distinguish the two. Now, as she stepped into the breakfast room, she found him already there, a newspaper folded upon the table before him. The headline, though couched in careful civility, bore the sharp edge of curiosity. "The Duke and Duchess of Arbor appear unusually united at Lady Somerset's gathering." Amelia poured herself a cup of tea. "So the world has discovered that we can stand side by side without scandal." Adrian looked up, his expression unreadable. "They also wonder what has changed. It seems our appearance together has disturbed certain expectations, or certain intentions," she said softly. "Was she there long?" "She left before the final performance," he replied, "but not before ensuring that every whisper began in her direction. I heard her name upon more than one tongue before the evening was done." Amelia stirred her tea slowly, the spoon clicking softly against the porcelain. "She will not retreat easily." "No," he agreed. "Predators rarely do." For a moment they were silent, listening to the faint patter of rain against the window panes. Then Adrian said, "We must continue as we have begun. Appearances are now more than performance, they are protection. Until Price returns with evidence, we must make her believe she has no opening to exploit." Amelia nodded. "Then we shall attend every invitation, dine, ride, and converse as the world expects of those who are content." Quote. He regarded her with a kind of quiet respect. "You play the part with grace, Amelia, yet I fear it asks more of you than I have a right to demand." "Grace," she said, "is seldom voluntary. It is the only armor left to those who have exhausted every other." That afternoon they rode together through the park, the scent of damp leaves rising from the ground, the air heavy with the promise of further rain. People turned to watch as they passed ladies whispering behind their fans, gentlemen tipping their hats with studied courtesy. Amelia sat straight upon her mare, her poise unflinching even as the weight of their scrutiny pressed against her. Adrian kept close beside her, his manner protective yet measured. To an observer, they might have seemed the image of serene companionship. When they returned, a carriage waited at the gate, a familiar one, bearing the Montrose crest. Adrian's expression darkened. "She has come," he said. Amelia's pulse quickened. "Here?" "Yes. It seems courtesy now travels uninvited." They entered the drawing-room together. Lady Elara Montrose stood by the window, a vision of elegance and artifice. The pale blue gown from the previous evening had been replaced by dove-grey silk, modest yet deliberate. She turned as they entered, her smile polished to perfection. "Your Grace," she said, inclining her head. "I hope I do not intrude." Quote, "You do," Amelia thought, though she returned the greeting with a composure that masked every thought. Adrian's tone, when he spoke, was civil but cool. "Lady Montrose, to what do we owe this visit?" Elara moved nearer, her gloved hands clasped lightly before her. "To friendship, surely. We are old acquaintances, are we not? I thought it cruel to let another season pass without renewing it." "Cruelty," Adrian said, "is a word better suited to other occasions between us." Quote, her smile faltered for only an instant before recovering. "You wound me, Your Grace. Time has softened what was once sharp." "Time," Amelia said gently, "has a way of revealing rather than softening." Elara turned toward her, the sweetness of her tone barely concealing irritation. "You speak with conviction, Duchess. One might almost believe experience taught it." "One might," Amelia replied evenly. A silence followed, brittle and tense. Then Elara laughed softly, breaking it. "Ah, how London loves a fairy tale. You two have become its newest subject. They say your affection was reborn last night among music and candlelight. How touching." Amelia met her gaze. Touching, perhaps, but real nonetheless. Elara's eyes narrowed a fraction. Reality can be such a fragile thing. One moment it stands upon air, the next it disappears. Do take care, my dear Duchess. The world is treacherous for those who build upon appearances. Quote. Before Amelia could answer, Adrian stepped forward. "Enough, Lady Montrose. Whatever purpose brought you here, speak it plainly or leave." Elara regarded him with a cool, almost pitying smile. "You mistake me. I came only to offer condolences for the years lost to misunderstanding. And perhaps," she added, her gaze flicking toward Amelia, "to see what has replaced them." "You have seen," he said. "Now go." Her composure wavered at the command, but she curtsied with calculated grace. "As you wish, Your Grace. Though I suspect we shall meet again soon. London is such a small place for hearts with unfinished business." When she was gone, the silence that followed felt almost like relief. Yet beneath it lay the steady pulse of unease. "She came to measure the distance between us," Amelia said, "and found it narrower than she hoped." Adrian replied, "She will not accept defeat." "No," he said, "but neither will we." Hosna. He looked toward the door through which Elara had departed, then back to Amelia. "We have begun something she cannot easily undo. Whatever else happens, we face it together." For a moment, she saw not the Duke who had once lived behind walls of pride, but a man stripped of illusion, standing beside her in the uncertain light. Outside, the rain began again, gentle but insistent, washing the dust from the stones, cleansing the air between them. The following week unfurled beneath a fragile calm that felt more like pause than peace. Caerwyn Hall stood cloaked in the hush that often follows a storm, its long corridors filled with the whisper of expectation. Elara's visit had left behind an invisible residue, something like the scent of smoke after a fire. Every servant moved with careful restraint, as though the very air might betray them. Amelia sensed it too, the tightening of the atmosphere, the quiet before the next tremor. Adrian spent much of his time in his study with Price, who had returned from London bearing the first fruits of his inquiries. Amelia saw them only briefly that morning as she passed by the open door. The investigator's voice, calm but urgent, carried just far enough for her to catch fragments of their conversation, names, places, the faint clink of glass as evidence was laid upon the desk. She heard the word chemist, then silence, and knew that whatever Price had uncovered was no longer mere suspicion. When the door finally opened, Adrian emerged with the air of a man who had glimpsed something that both clarified and unsettled him. He paused upon seeing her in the hall. "Did you find what you sought?" she asked. "Enough," he said, "to make truth look uglier than conjecture." "Then she is guilty?" His eyes met hers, steady but shadowed. "Beyond reasonable doubt." The chemist confessed to supplying her with substances slow, tasteless and untraceable. He thought them destined for experiments upon animals. When he read of Lord Montrose's death, he began to suspect, but fear kept him silent. "And now?" "He will testify if need arises," Adrian replied, "but I doubt it will come to that. Elara has played her last card." Amelia studied his face. "Does she know you have learned the truth?" "Not yet, but she suspects something has turned. She sent another letter this morning, written with her usual elegance, asking to speak privately. And you?" "I will not go alone," he said. "If she demands an audience, she will face us both." The decision, once spoken, seemed to still the air. Amelia felt a strange mixture of apprehension and resolve. For years she had endured in silence. Now the time had come to act beside the man who had once left her behind. The irony did not escape her. Love, she thought, was sometimes born not of tenderness but of necessity. That evening they attended another gathering, Lady Holston's masquerade, a glittering event long anticipated by society. Masks of silk and feathers turned familiar faces into mysteries. Music swelled and laughter floated like perfume through the candle-lit air. Beneath the surface of gaiety, however, tension coiled unseen. Amelia entered on Adrian's arm, her gown of silver blue reflecting the flicker of the chandeliers. Her mask concealed half her face, but her eyes, calm, luminous, drew every glance they met. Around them, whispers resumed their ancient work. "She grows lovelier each season," someone murmured. "Perhaps marriage suits her at last," another replied. Amelia pretended not to hear, though she felt the words settle upon her like frost. Adrian, sensing it, tightened his hold upon her arm, a gesture small in motion but vast in meaning. The music began, a waltz of slow precision. Adrian turned to her, bowing slightly. "May I have this dance?" It was the first time he had asked such a thing in 7 years of marriage. She hesitated only long enough to feel the tremor of her own pulse. "You may." When he drew her into his arms, the world seemed to contract until there was nothing beyond the measured rhythm of their steps. His hand rested at her waist, steady and sure, guiding her through the crowd. Around them, the masked couples swirled in graceful confusion, but Amelia felt only the quiet between them, the place where words had long been absent and where something unspoken now stirred. "You dance well," he murmured. "I have had years to practice," she replied. "Alone?" "Always." A shadow crossed his expression, but it passed quickly. "Then let us call this evening an end to solitude." Her lips parted, but before she could answer, a ripple of movement swept through the room. The music faltered. At the top of the grand staircase stood a woman dressed in gold, her mask shaped like the wings of a falcon, her presence commanding the attention of every soul present. Elara. She descended slowly, the crowd parting before her. Her gaze, sharp even through the mask, found Adrian and lingered. Then it shifted to Amelia, cool and deliberate. The air thickened. The music resumed, though no one truly listened. Adrian's voice was quiet but firm. "She means to make a spectacle. Then we shall give her none," Amelia said. But Elara moved with purpose through the throng, her every step a performance. When she reached them, she curtsied with perfect form. "Your Grace," she said to Adrian, "what a pleasure to see you once more. You wear contentment well, it seems marriage has agreed with you." "And widowhood with you," he replied evenly. Her smile wavered. "You are cruel." "I learned cruelty from those who mistook deceit for affection." Quote. Elara turned her gaze upon Amelia. "And you, Duchess, how fortunate you are to possess what others squandered." "I possess nothing that was not freely given," Amelia said, "and I keep nothing that does not wish to stay." For a heartbeat the two women regarded one another, the air between them sharp with what neither dared to speak aloud. Then Elara laughed lightly, though the sound was hollow. "Perhaps we should speak privately," she said. "There are matters best left from curious ears." "Cruf." "Indeed," Adrian said, "but not tonight." She studied him, the amusement fading from her eyes, replaced by something colder. "Then another night, perhaps, sooner than you think." With that, she turned and vanished into the crowd, leaving behind a trail of whispers and the faint scent of her perfume, rich, sweet, and suffocating. Amelia exhaled slowly. "She will not stop." "No," Adrian said, "but she has misjudged her strength. She returns to a game whose rules she no longer understands." Kozad. He looked at her, and in that gaze lay the beginning of something unspoken, a promise, fragile but real. For the first time, she felt that they stood not as strangers bound by law, but as allies bound by choice. The morning after the masquerade dawned in a light that seemed to bear the pallor of exhaustion. The revelry of the night had ended hours before, yet its echoes lingered in every whisper across London. Servants carried gossip along with the day's post, and even the newspapers, those discreet messengers of scandal, hinted that something had shifted in the world of the Carewins. At Carewin Hall, however, the stillness was deceptive. Adrian sat in his study, a half-written letter before him, the ink drying at the tip of his pen. He had slept little. The confrontation with Ilara haunted his thoughts like an unfinished melody. Her words, those quiet threats cloaked in civility, had revealed more than she intended. She knew that the mask of friendship could no longer serve her. What remained was the venom of desperation. Amelia entered without ceremony. She had long since ceased to knock upon doors that had once shut her out. He looked up at the soft sound of her step. "You are restless," she said gently, "and you are perceptive as always." "The two have long walked together in this house," she replied. "What troubles you now?" He gestured to the letter. "Ilara's hold is slipping, but she will not yield easily. I have written to my solicitor. The journals, the confession of the chemist, and Price's statement are to be sealed and kept in trust. If anything should befall either of us, the truth will not die with silence." Amelia crossed the room, standing beside his desk. "You believe she means harm?" He hesitated. "I have stopped believing in coincidence. Her courage is the kind born of desperation, and desperate people are capable of anything." "Then we must not meet her alone again," Amelia said. He looked at her, the faintest trace of admiration softening the lines of fatigue on his face. "You speak as though we are at war." "We are," she answered quietly. "Only the weapons differ." That evening, as rain fell in a thin veil over the windows, they dined together in the smaller parlour. It was the same room where, years before, Amelia had eaten her solitary meals while he secluded himself upstairs. Now the two of them shared the space, though the old silence lingered between words. "I sometimes wonder," he said at last, "what might have been had I seen you clearly from the beginning." Amelia's fork stilled. "We cannot rewrite the first chapters, Adrian, only the rest." He regarded her with a strange, quiet intensity. "And if I wish to begin again, then you must start by being present in what remains." The firelight flickered across her face, gilding the calm strength that had once gone unnoticed. He realized, with a jolt that was both regret and revelation, that he had mistaken her stillness for indifference, when it had been endurance all along. When the meal ended, he rose. "There is one rumor we cannot allow to fester," he said. "Ilara has begun spreading whispers that our marriage was never consummated. It is her last weapon: discredit the Duchess, weaken the Duke." Amelia's composure did not falter, though colour rose faintly in her cheeks. "People will believe what they wish to believe, but they will not be allowed to believe that." He moved toward her, stopping within arm's reach. The lamplight trembled between them. "Forgive me if I speak plainly," he said. "There is only one way to silence such talk, to make what was once mere form into truth." Her breath caught. "You mean—" "I mean that the appearance of unity must become unity itself." The words hung between them, fragile and dangerous. For a long moment she could not speak. "Would this be another strategy?" she asked at last. He shook his head. "No. It began as one, but I find I no longer know where strategy ends and desire begins." His honesty startled her more than the confession itself. She looked at him, not the Duke of Alba, but the man beneath the title, stripped of his armor of pride. "Why now?" she asked softly. "After so many years?" "Because for the first time I see you," he said simply. "Not as duty or salvation, but as the woman who has stood beside me when all others fled." Amelia felt something within her shift, a quiet breaking that was not pain but release. For years she had longed for words such as these, and now that they had come, they filled her with both warmth and terror. "You ask much," she whispered. "I ask only what was already ours by right, if not by heart," he replied. He stepped closer. The faint scent of sandalwood mingled with the rain-cooled air. When his hand touched hers, she did not draw back. The years of silence, of restraint, of distance, seemed to collapse into that single moment. Outside, the storm deepened, thunder rolling across the hills. Within, the fire burned low, its glow soft and steady. He raised his hand to her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. She closed her eyes. "Amelia," he murmured, her name a confession and a promise. When his lips met hers, The kiss was not hurried but inevitable, the completion of a sentence left unfinished for 7 years. What began as courtesy became hunger. What began as strategy became surrender. The world beyond the windows ceased to exist. Later, as rain whispered against the glass, Amelia lay in the quiet that followed, her head resting upon his shoulder. She could feel his heart beneath her cheek, steady and sure. The walls of the room, which had once held only silence, now held breath and warmth. He pressed a kiss to her hair. "Whatever comes," he said, "we face it together now." She closed her eyes, letting the words settle into her like the slow fall of light after storm. For the first time in years, she felt neither loneliness nor fear, only stillness and the beginning of something that might one day be called peace. The following day dawned clear and bright, the first unclouded morning in weeks. The gardens of Caerwyn Hall lay glazed with frost that sparkled beneath the early Sunday. Amelia stood by the window of her chamber, her hair unbound, the remnants of sleep softening the lines of her face. For once, the great house felt alive. Somewhere below, servants moved briskly. The faint clatter of china drifted upward. She had not realized how deeply silence had inhabited these walls until it began to lift. Adrian entered quietly. He was already dressed for the day, though there was a lightness in his step she had never seen before. He stopped at the threshold, watching her for a moment. "You are awake early," he said. "I could not sleep again," she replied, turning toward him. The light was too bright. Quote, he smiled faintly. "Perhaps the world finally remembers that it is allowed to shine." She studied him, the ease in his posture, the warmth that had replaced the guarded reserve she had grown so used to. Something fragile but real had taken root between them during the storm, and now it seemed to bloom with the dawn. They took breakfast together in the small sunlit parlor overlooking the gardens. It was a simple meal, yet to Amelia it felt like ceremony. Adrian poured her coffee, his hands steady, his manner unhurried. The ordinary had become extraordinary merely because it was shared. "I have sent word to Price," he said after a moment. "He is to continue gathering evidence until the case against Ilara is beyond refute. But he cautions that she grows bolder. Yesterday, she was seen at Lady Holston's again, speaking with anyone willing to listen. She will not surrender her game until she is cornered," Amelia replied. "And when that moment comes, she will strike with whatever remains." "Then we must give her no room to strike," he said. "We shall attend Lady Somerset's musical evening tomorrow. She will expect us, and she will be watching. The appearance of harmony will convince her that her poison has failed." Amelia met his eyes. "And if harmony becomes more than appearance? Then she will find herself powerless," he said. Their carriage rolled into London the following evening, as lamps were being lit along the streets. Lady Somerset's townhouse glowed like a jewel among the grey facades, carriages crowding its entrance. Music drifted into the night, a prelude to gossip, laughter, and all the glittering deceit that high society called pleasure. Inside, Amelia felt the hush of attention fall upon them once more as they entered the drawing-room together. The world had already begun to weave a new story around them, the distant Duke and his steadfast Duchess, now miraculously reconciled. There was admiration in the glances that followed, and envy too. Adrian, perfectly composed, greeted their hostess with warmth that was almost genuine. "My wife has promised to play for us again," he said when Lady Somerset expressed delight at their presence. Amelia turned toward him, surprised. "Have I?" "You have now," he murmured, and she caught the hint of humor in his tone. When her time came, she sat at the pianoforte, her fingers finding the keys as though they remembered what her heart could not yet name. The melody rose gentle at first, then growing in strength until it filled the room. She poured into it every unspoken word, every ache and tenderness that had been buried beneath years of decorum. The last note lingered like a sigh before silence claimed it. Applause broke, warm and genuine. But she heard only the quiet breath she drew when she met Adrian's gaze across the room. There was pride there, and something deeper, something that seemed to steady her. Ilara arrived late. Her gown was gold again, her smile flawless. Yet beneath the polished surface lay cracks visible only to those who looked closely. When she approached, Adrian turned to her with the measured calm of a man who no longer feared what he had once desired. "Lady Montrose," he said, "we were not expecting you." "I am seldom expected, yet always welcomed," she replied, her tone light but her eyes sharp. "Not always," Amelia said. Ilara's gaze flickered. Still the composed Duchess. "Tell me, does serenity come easily to you, or must it be rehearsed?" "Some of us need not rehearse what is genuine," Amelia replied. Adrian placed his hand lightly at his wife's back. "Lady Montrose, you are ever eloquent, but we are here for music, not quarrel. Perhaps another time for your performances. Ilara's smile thinned. You misunderstand me, Your Grace. I merely wish to offer congratulations. Rumor speaks of great happiness between you. And truth, he said, has begun to agree. Her mask slipped then, just a little. How swiftly affection blooms after so many barren years. I wonder will it endure another season? Amelia answered before he could. It need not endure seasons. It has endured silence. That is the harder test. Clah! For a moment, something cold and feral flashed behind Ilara's eyes. She inclined her head with brittle grace. How poetic. I shall leave you to your symphony of redemption. She withdrew, her skirts whispering across the floor. The murmurs resumed around them, but the air seemed lighter now, as though some invisible weight had shifted from their shoulders. Adrian turned to Amelia. She is slipping, he said. The more she speaks, the less the world believes her. Comes note. She will not forgive that, Amelia replied. Then she will have to live with it, he said quietly. We all must live with the truths we have created. They remained for another hour, fulfilling every courtesy, their conversation easy, their laughter unforced. When at last they left, the chill of the night felt almost pleasant against their skin. In the carriage, Amelia leaned her head against the window, watching the city lights recede. Do you believe it is over? She asked. No, Adrian said, but the end is close. Close can still be dangerous. So can hope, he murmured. Their eyes met in the dim light, and for once neither looked away. The final days of autumn settled upon the highlands with quiet majesty. Morning mists rose from the fields like breath from the earth, and the moors beyond Caerwyn Hall turned to shades of bronze and grey. Inside the great house a new rhythm had taken hold, steady, calm, alive. Yet beneath that stillness ran the undercurrent of anticipation, as though the very air awaited the closing of a chapter too long unwritten. Amelia stood at her writing desk, the faint scent of ink and parchment surrounding her. She had begun a letter to Lady Margaret, an answer long delayed, but her pen hovered above the page. Words felt heavy now, burdened with all that had changed. Across the room, the door opened. Adrian entered, a folded paper in his hand. His expression was composed, yet there was a certain finality in his eyes. It is done, he said. Price has returned with proof enough to end this quietly. The chemist's confession, the journal, the letters, all are verified. Ilara cannot dispute them. Amelia exhaled softly. What will you do? Confront her once, and never again? Alone? No, he said. Not this time. They travelled to London 2 days later. The city lay beneath a low, cold sky, its chimneys trailing ribbons of smoke that curled into the gloom. At Grosvenor Square, Ilara's townhouse loomed elegant and silent, its shutters half drawn as though guarding secrets within. The servant who admitted them was pale with unease, and when they entered the drawing-room, Ilara rose from her chair, startled but composed. Your Graces, she said with a brittle smile. What an unexpected honour. Spare us the theatre, Adrian said. We did not come for civility. Her gaze flicked toward Amelia, then back to him. Ah, then for justice? That is a dangerous pursuit in polite society. You speak of danger as though you invented it, Amelia said quietly. Ilara's expression hardened. You think yourself his saviour, Duchess. How quaint. Adrian placed the papers upon the table between them. These speak for themselves, he said. Your husband's handwriting, the chemist's testimony, your own accounts from Italy. I have no wish to disgrace you publicly, but should you persist in your deceit, these will find their way to every magistrate and newspaper in England. Ilara stared at the documents, the colour draining from her face. You would destroy me? No, he said. You destroyed yourself 7 years ago. I merely refused to bury the evidence. Her eyes glittered with something close to panic. And what do you ask of me? Leave England, he said. Tonight. Take what remains of your fortune and go where your name carries no weight. If you stay, your ruin will be complete. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she gave a short, brittle laugh. You think yourself free of me. You, who chased my ghost for 7 years. You will never be free. I live in every mistake you ever made. Adrian's voice was calm. Not any more. He turned to leave, but Amelia lingered. She regarded Ilara with a mixture of pity and finality. You could have been more than legend, she said softly, but you chose to be a caution. Ilara's composure shattered. Do not pity me, Duchess, she hissed. One day you will learn that love and mercy are merely different forms of weakness. Amelia's gaze did not waver. If that is so, then weakness has given me peace. I wish you the same. When they departed, The air outside felt sharp and new, as though the city itself had been scoured clean by rain. 2 mornings later, Price arrived at Caerwyn Hall with final news. "She has left England," he said. "A ship bound for the continent. Alone." Adrian nodded. "Let her find whatever refuge she can." When the door closed behind the investigator, silence settled once more. The storm had passed. Amelia walked with Adrian through the gardens that afternoon. The frost glittered like crystal upon the hedges. Each breath rose in small clouds that dissolved into the pale air. He took her hand, not as formality, but as instinct. "It is strange," he said. "For years I believed closure would come from vengeance, yet now it feels like peace." "Peace rarely looks as we expect," she answered. "It is quieter, lighter." He stopped, turning to face her. "You have given me both." She smiled faintly. "I merely waited for you to find them." They stood in silence for a time, the sound of wind moving through the bare branches above them. Then Adrian said, "There is something I should have said long ago." She looked up, expectant. "I love you, Amelia. I say it not as atonement, but as truth. I cannot undo the years I wasted, but I can fill what remains with gratitude that you endured them beside me." Her eyes shone, though her voice remained steady. "And I love you not because time demands it, but because it has taught me the worth of patience." He drew her close then, pressing his forehead to hers. The scent of winter grass mingled with her hair, and for the first time in memory the world felt wholly still. The days that followed unfolded in gentle rhythm. Letters arrived, invitations declined, life resumed its steady pulse. Yet beneath the routine lay something irrevocably changed. Caerwyn Hall no longer echoed with absence. It breathed with quiet contentment, with laughter that had once seemed impossible. One evening, as twilight deepened, Amelia sat at the pianoforte once more. Her hands found a melody of her own, making no longer mournful, but tender. Adrian listened from the doorway, his face softened by the glow of the fire. When the final notes faded, he crossed the room and stood beside her. "What shall we call that?" he asked. She looked up at him. "A beginning," he smiled. "Then play it again." And she did, her music rising through the old halls like a benediction, carrying with it the promise that even the longest winter yields to spring.